Hello, everybody. So, welcome to part 4 of Toxin Sequestration Theory. This is my new theory of cancer. It builds on the research of MIT professor Stephanie Seneff. I've already presented parts 1, 2, and 3. In part 1, I talked about the standard theory of cancer, which is I call the selfish genetic theory of cancer. I talked about how that was disproven by the nuclear transfer experiments. And then I talked about Thomas Seyfried's theory, which I call the selfish metabolic theory of cancer. His theory appears to be more correct than the standard theory of cancer, but nevertheless, it still maintains this idea that cancer is selfish and malignant and uncontrollable. And I dispute that idea, and there's a lot of reason why. Just sort of logically speaking, it makes sense that the body tries to protect itself from toxic overload. And in my theory, TST, the idea is that the body builds a cancer tumor on purpose in order to store, sequester, and process toxins. After all, in our modern world, toxins are everywhere, and our bodies try to protect themselves by sequestering those toxins away from the normal healthy tissue. And that's what a cancer tumor does. So that's my theory, toxin sequestration theory. I also reinterpreted the fuel sources of cancer growth that appear in Thomas Seyfried's theory, namely sugar and glutamine, from the perspective of toxin sequestration. I argued that glutamine and fructose are actually toxins that cancer cells try to sequester to protect us from their toxic effects. And that's why cancer loves sugar so much. It's not that cancer has an insatiable appetite for sugar because it wants to grow rapidly. That's not what's going on. It's that it's actually trying to detoxify the body because sugars are toxins. And similarly with glutamine, I argued that glutamine is a carrier of a toxin called ammonia, and that's why cancer loves glutamine so much. In part 2, I extended this idea to a whole bunch of other toxins like seed oils, excess iron, microplastics, ethanol, and cigarette smoke. In part 3, I extended it to even more toxins like excess estrogen and mycotoxins, which are mold toxins. Now, in this video, I'm going to extend it to 2 more toxic effects. But interestingly, both of the things that I'll talk about today are actually cancer treatments, things that are used in the medical system or in alternative medicine to actually treat cancer. And the first thing I'll talk about is radiation, like X-ray radiation, which of course is used in practice in medicine to target cancer tumors. And the second thing I'll talk about is vitamin C, and high-dose vitamin C is also used to treat cancer. But I'm going to give a different angle on them, and I'll say, well, maybe these things aren't great for treating cancer. After all, my theory is that cancer is actually not a disease, rather it is a symptom of toxic overload, which is causing oxidative stress in the body. And anything that actually increases your oxidative stress is bad for you, because ultimately, when people die of a chronic disease, they are dying of the oxidative stress due to toxicity. That is my theory, that basically toxicity causes oxidative stress, and that oxidative stress is what actually damages the body's organs and what causes people to die. In the case of radiation, so let's focus on, say, X-ray radiation. It's not a chemical stressor, but it is a physical stressor, and nevertheless, it still adds oxidative stress to the body. And it actually gets very interesting to understand how that works. So with radiation, what we've been taught is that when you get hit by X-ray radiation, say from like a dental X-ray, some of those X-ray photons can hit your DNA and damage the DNA directly. But it turns out that picture is very misleading. It's not the primary means by which the X-rays damage your body. The primary means is that the X-rays damage water, and our bodies are made up of tons of water molecules, right? So the first thing the X-rays hit are not the DNA, they hit the water first. So they hit the water in our cells, and when an X-ray hits a water molecule, it can literally rip the water molecule apart. And reactive oxygen species, ROS, are exactly what you get when you rip a water molecule apart. Namely, if you take H2O and you rip it apart, you would get OH radical which is the hydroxyl radical, which is the most dangerous of all the reactive oxygen species. And so the direct result of getting an X-ray shine on your body is the creation of these ROS chemicals. And now those ROS chemicals can then go off and cause destruction in the body. They can damage the DNA, they can damage the proteins and the mitochondria and the lipids in your cells. But that's a secondary effect. And so I just want to be clear that we've been actually misled about how X-rays damage the body. The primary mechanism is not that they directly damage DNA, it's that they directly damage water to create ROS. And those ROS can then go off to damage, other things. But that's crucial for understanding the mechanism of cancer, because mainstream medicine would have you believe that the primary mechanism by which radiation damages the body is by causing mutations in your DNA. And I'm arguing that's not the primary mechanism. So if you believed that theory, it would support their genetic sort of view on cancer. But in my view, ROS is at the center of cancer. So okay, hopefully that clarifies the point, which is that radiation creates ROS, and my argument is that anything that creates ROS can lead to cancer tumors. Now, in the past, I've talked about chemical stressors, things like oxalates, things like heavy metals and deuterium, and those things get physically stored inside of cancer tumors. But when you have radiation, it's not a chemical anymore, so it can't store the radiation. On the other hand, it could store the oxidative stress that the radiation creates, like the ROS chemicals and things like that. And so, interestingly, the fact that radiation does cause cancer kind of forces me to extend my theory beyond just chemicals. So we can't just think that my toxin sequestration theory is only about chemical toxins. Now I have to think about chemical stressors and physical stressors. And there's a whole list of physical stressors, not just X-ray radiation, but there's also cell phone radiation like microwaves. There's also hot exposure, heat exposure, cold exposure, and very intense exercise. There's a lot of different ways to stress your body out. And so I would say another one is like hypoxia, like lack of oxygen. That's another physical stressor. And so I'm very excited to extend my theory from not just chemical stressors, but also to physical stressors. And the way that we can extend the theory is by arguing that the body has a ROS threshold. It basically has a budget that it can handle. It has a certain budget of the amount of local ROS that it can handle in any specific organ, right? And whenever that budget is exceeded, if you have too much ROS, reactive oxygen species, that are produced in a certain area, then your body's like, oh shoot, I'm in big trouble. I have way too much oxidative stress in this organ, so I need to start building a cancer tumor to sequester that oxidative stress. And this brings up the principle of an ROS budget. And you can basically imagine a table where you have a list of all the different things that in a given day produce ROS in your body. So you could be exposed to, say, cigarette smoke, alcohol consumption, excess sugar in your diet, seed oils in your diet, heavy metals, excess iron, and there's a whole long list of things there. And we can include potentially like radiation. But your body has a certain budget, and maybe there's a certain number that it can tolerate. Like it can tolerate like 100 units of ROS or something. And each one of these things may contribute 10 units or 20 units. But as soon as that threshold is exceeded for ROS, then the body's like, okay, I have to build a cancer tumor. And you can also think of it as basically like the X-rays produce a very sharp, acute spike in ROS, whereas these chemical toxins are producing a chronic amount of ROS. And so the X-ray exposure can kind of push you over the edge. It can just give you that kick to tell the body like, okay, I have to do something about this. I have to build a cancer tumor to sequester these chemical toxins. So the radiation just kind of kicked you over the edge. Um, yeah, and so like this also you know, can be supported by actual experimental data. There is data that says that the more radiation exposure, the higher the likelihood that you'll get a cancer tumor, and it goes up linearly. So it's a linear relationship that the chance that you'll get a cancer tumor grows up linearly with the amount of X-ray radiation you're exposed to. But that makes sense from the perspective that there's like a fixed budget, and like if there's a fixed ROS budget, then the chance that you'll go over that budget is going to grow linearly with the exposure to X-rays. Yeah, so that's the basic idea, and so it's consistent with my theory. And I actually even give a name for this more generalized theory because my theory for chemical toxins, I call it Toxin Sequestration Theory. Whenever I broaden the umbrella to include not just chemical stressors but also physical stressors, I call it redox sequestration theory. Redox is just a fancy name for oxidative stress. But redox sequestration theory makes it clear that the cancer tumors are not just focusing on sequestering specific toxins, but also sequestering the oxidative stress that they create. And so like sequestering all these ROS chemicals and things as well. So they try to keep the ROS inside the cancer tumor. Okay, so that's the basic idea of radiation and how radiation could cause cancer. I'm very excited about extending it in different directions. Like I want to see how things like heat exposure and cold exposure might also cause similar effects. The next thing I'll talk about, which is a blog I just posted just earlier today, was on vitamin C. So vitamin C is one of the most trusted supplements in the whole world, and it's especially trusted in the cancer community. It's widely used to treat cancer, and it's typically taken in very high doses. They call it megadosing vitamin C. People taking many grams or tens of grams of vitamin C. Sometimes people take it orally. Also, you can get an even stronger effect if you inject it intravenously into, with an IV. And so this is used both in mainstream medicine and it's used in alternative medicine as well. But the problem is that if you have the wrong theory of cancer, you might be getting this idea of using vitamin C completely wrong. And vitamin C is viewed as an antioxidant, but that's only true at low dosages or at physiological levels. When you go to these really high dosages, it actually turns from being antioxidant to being pro-oxidant. It becomes something that actually produces ROS. It produces reactive oxygen species. And so in that sense, at high dosages, for all intents and purposes, we can view high-dose vitamin C as a toxin. And that may surprise people because, of course, how could a vitamin be a toxin? But you're not meant to take these very high dosages of vitamin C. It's not ancestrally relevant. It's not what our ancestors did. And so it's not really a species appropriate thing to do. And and of course I have suspicions about other vitamins as well. Like later on, I'll get into vitamin E and vitamin A and that kind of stuff too. But nevertheless, with vitamin C, obviously people think that it's sort of an antioxidant, but then at high dosages it becomes pro-oxidant. Now, depending on who you ask, they might say that this is even a good thing because sometimes the mainstream medical community says, oh, but like cancer cells are really sensitive to ROS. And so if all we have to do is increase the amount of ROS in the body with high dose vitamin C, and then that will stress out the cancer cells and cause them to die. And that's a good thing, right? They say. So, but in my perspective, from my theory, anything that adds oxidative stress to your body is causing disease. In fact, that's the only source of disease. And one of the guys who agrees with me is Thomas Levy. Now, I recently came across Thomas Levy on an interview. He did an interview on Jesse Chappis, and his theory of chronic disease agrees with mine. He basically says that the only cause of chronic disease is oxidative stress. He says there's nothing else that causes chronic disease, and that's perfectly in line with my view. However, he comes to a different conclusion. Like my conclusion would be like, okay, now that we know that, let's get on the carnivore diet, because the carnivore diet is the one that reduces oxidative stress the most. But he doesn't really talk about the carnivore diet. Instead, he talks about high dose vitamin C, and he talks about how you should take vitamin C because it's kind of antioxidant and stuff. And so, like, depending on who you ask, the mainstream is like, oh, they like the fact that vitamin C causes oxidative stress because it stresses out the cancer. But then Levy is saying the opposite. He likes vitamin C because it's an antioxidant. Well, someone has to be wrong, right? But in any case, my view is that high dose vitamin C is pro-oxidant. It causes oxidative stress, and that's bad for us. Okay, it's bad for cancer, but it's also bad for the body as well. And cancer is not a disease; it's a symptom. So you don't want to attack cancer anyway. So anyway, with vitamin C, they've done clinical trials and they've gotten mixed results. They haven't been able to show that in these big clinical trials that actually vitamin C helps with long-term survival. In fact, they've even gotten some concerning results where sometimes it led to faster disease progression. And so there's no evidence really that I found that vitamin C actually, that high dose vitamin C actually increases the lifespan of people with cancer. Rather, there's some evidence that it might do the opposite, right? So that's what I found in my research. And but interestingly, some people who do take high dose vitamin C report that they initially, briefly, feel better, like their fatigue goes down and their inflammation goes down. But we might be able to explain that from the perspective of Garrett Smith's toxic bowel theory. Garrett Smith is a world-leading expert in dealing with toxicity, and he argues that toxins are stored in the liver typically, and then they get excreted in the bile in order to detoxify the body. But if you take like a oral megadose or something, or an IV huge dose of some toxin, that actually stresses the body out so much that the body shuts down its detox process. So it actually shuts down the bile excretion from the liver and causes the liver to kind of back up. It like blocks the liver from doing its job of excreting the bile. And so we could explain why some cancer patients feel better after the high dose vitamin C by the fact that, well, it stopped their detox. So in detox feels bad. Like people feel fatigued and tired and inflamed whenever their body is dumping toxins, out of their body. So it takes a toll on the body. And so that's one plausible explanation why some people felt better after these high dose vitamin C's, is that perhaps it halted their detox. But like I said, we don't have any evidence that it actually lengthens lifespan. So, from my theory's perspective, we can explain how does vitamin C act as a toxin. And the most important mechanism is just having the presence of free metals like free iron or free copper inside the body, which, by the way, all of us do. So, many of us have excess iron or excess copper just kind of floating around, not really participating and doing anything biologically. And I've talked about that in my previous, videos. But what happens is that the first thing that vitamin C does when it's sort of in the body is that it reduces iron into this very reactive form. So it gives an electron to iron, and then when the iron's in this reactive form, it catalyzes something called the Fenton reaction, which converts hydrogen peroxide to the hydroxyl radical, which is the most dangerous of all the ROS chemicals. Now, I apologize for getting a little technical there, but I just want to explain that the net result is that vitamin C ended up producing a hydroxyl radical, which is an ROS. It's the most dangerous ROS, and it was sort of catalyzed by this iron ion. And so just having the presence of iron makes vitamin C much more dangerous. And like I said, we all have this excess iron in our bodies. But there's a second dangerous effect, which is that some fraction of vitamin C will always degrade into oxalates, no matter what. So no matter, even if you don't have any iron, you're still going to get like vitamin C degrading into oxalates, and oxalates is a toxin. So high dose vitamin C will always give you some dose of oxalates. And then you could say, well, from the perspective of my theory, cancer cells are going to want to sequester vitamin C and pull it in because vitamin C is creating all this oxidative stress. And sure enough, that's exactly what we see in practice. So vitamin C, gets pulled into cancer cells through these two transporters that are called GLUT1 and GLUT3. These are these glucose transporters, and basically they have a dual role of transporting both glucose as well as vitamin C. Or more specifically, they transport the oxidized form of vitamin C. Once vitamin C is pulled into the cancer cell, then it's rapidly reduced back to the non-oxidized form. And then people have shown that the cancer cells do accumulate vitamin C to higher levels than normal tissue. So if you look basically like at a snapshot, how much vitamin C is inside cancer cells versus how much vitamin C is inside normal cells, they found that the amount inside cancer cells is significantly higher. So like multiple times higher, say maybe 3 times higher, I don't know the exact number, but it's multiple times higher than in normal cells. And so that tells us that cancer is trying to protect the body from the toxicity of vitamin C. And it's not for like selfish reasons, like it's trying to grow or something. In fact, in practice, what cancer cells try to do is once they pull in the oxidized form and they reduce it back to its usual form, they actually spit it back out as a service that they provide to the body. Because the oxidized form is the most dangerous form of the vitamin C. It's called DHA. That's the name of the oxidized form of vitamin C. They spit it back out to the bloodstream to say like, okay, I did my job. I'm giving it back to you in a better form. Nevertheless, like even still, that the fact that they spit it back, they still get a kind of accumulation. They still get a net accumulation of vitamin C inside of them. Once again, we can think of cancer tumors as like the body's second liver because vitamin C is normally processed by the liver. So the exact same thing that the liver does is what the cancer cells do as well. They both upregulate these transporters that pull in the vitamin C. They both convert it to the reduced form, and they both spit it back out. So the liver and the cancer tumors are doing the exact same thing, and it's looking like cancer tumors are the body's second liver once again. All right. So just to wrap up on vitamin C, it looks like all these high-dose vitamin C protocols that people are using both in mainstream medicine and in alternative medicine are likely misguided, in my opinion. And that's why it's so crucial to have the right theory of cancer. If you view cancer as selfish and something you want to kill, then yeah, like high-dose vitamin C might work for you. But if you view cancer as something that is just something the body is using to protect you from oxidative stress, then vitamin C is absolutely not something you should take because it adds huge amounts of oxidative stress to your body, and that's literally the thing that kills people in the end, in my view. Fingers crossed. I hope that this message will reach people that might be considering high-dose vitamin C. Like I said, from my view, this is not the right approach. So with that, let's end the video. Thanks everyone for listening. Stay tuned for more on this theory.